GP Solo Small Firm and General Practice Division's latest Activate Diversity Series program, Insights into Border Policy and Legal Advocacy. My name is James Durant, and I have the privilege of serving as the Diversity Director for the ABA GP Solo Division, and I'm thrilled to see so many of you joining us for this important conversation. The Activate Diversity Series was created to explore and amplify diverse perspectives, champion inclusivity, and provide attorneys with the knowledge and tools needed to advocate effectively in today's complex legal landscape. Today's program will focus on crucial border policy and the role legal advocates can play in supporting immigrant and asylum rights. Thank you all for being here, for your commitment to learning and making a difference in our communities. I will pass the mic on to our moderator, Valencia Herrera, for further introductions. Valencia.
Hello, everyone. My name is Valencia Herrera. I am an immigration attorney in California at the Grande Law Firm. I'm thrilled to be co-moderating this timely discussion on immigration and border policy. We are so thrilled and so honored and deeply grateful to have a group of esteemed panelists who took time out of their busy schedules and advocacy work to be here with us today. But before we introduce our panelists and outline today's program, I'd like to invite my co-moderator to introduce herself and offer further welcomes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kerline. I'm not an immigration attorney. I'm actually an intellectual property entertainment law attorney based in Boston, Massachusetts. But I'm so excited that you are here today. And as a co-moderator, I would just like to highlight that it's important, even if you are not practicing in the field of immigration law, this topic hits home for many of us. And I am going to introduce the chair of the division in a second. But this series, Activate Diversity, is not just about hearing about the ways we can help, but actually putting this into action. So as we hear from the speakers and as you attentively pay attention to the program, I want to challenge you to think about ways that you can lead and activate diversity in your community. And at the end of today's program, we will circle back and hear from some of you on how you think you can do so or ways you intend to do so. And now at this moment, I would like to introduce the chair of the American Bar Association Solo, Small Firm, and General Practice Division, the Honorable Judge Melody Wilkinson.
Greetings from the GP Solo, Small Practice, and General Practices Division of the American Bar Association. I am very proud to be the chair of GP Solo and Small Firm for the 2024 and 2025 bar year. And we are also thrilled to have all of you, and we invite you to enjoy along with us our wonderful program on insights into border policy and legal advocacy. This is a very timely topic, and I'm proud that our division and our diversity board can sponsor this with you. However, I want to tell you a little bit about this Activate Diversity series that we have, which is really a wonderful thing that our division has. But in 2020, we started this Activate Diversity series, and this is actually the 14th program that GP Solo and Small Firm is going to be presenting. We're very fortunate that we have our moderators. They're also active in the division, and so it's great that you all could moderate. But we are so lucky today to have our panelists, and I'm excited. I know that they're going to be introduced to all of you here before their presentations, but we've got great panelists, a great program planned, and we are thrilled to be here to present it to you. But presentation would not be possible if it wasn't for our wonderful division sponsors. And so I do want to show recognition and give recognition to our premier sponsor, which is Thomson Reuters. And we also have several corporate division sponsors, which includes ABA Retirement Funds, iManage, Lex Reception, Spotlight Branding, Tabs 3 Software LLC. So thank you very much to our sponsors. And I also want to remind everyone, which is our mission, and I feel that we are succeeding this today with the program that we are presenting, and your success is our mission. And so thank you for being a part of GP Solo and Small Firm. If you're not already an active member of GP Solo and Small Firm, then come join us, become active. And we look forward to hopefully meeting you at one of our upcoming meetings or perhaps seeing you on a future Zoom presentation. I'm going to pass the baton back to Kerline, and thank you so much. And again, Kerline, thank you for everything you and our committee and our board is doing for diversity.
Thank you, Chair Wilkinson, for your leadership, your commitment to the division, and your continuous support of the Diversity Board. It's greatly appreciated and demonstrates that the division is really and truly committed to diversity. At this time, I would like to direct the attention of the attendees to a pre-recorded welcome from ABA President, Mr. Bill Baez.
Hello, I'm Bill Baez, President of the American Bar Association. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar in the Activate Diversity series, which is sponsored by the ABA Solo, Small Firm, and General Practice Division. Here's my hope for you today, that you'll find this program on border policies and legal advocacy both insightful and valuable. The ABA has extensive work in the immigration sphere, and that underscores what makes our profession so vital for this effort. As lawyers, we have the power and responsibility to ensure due process and equal justice under law. We seek to make justice real. It is an essential part of our mission at the American Bar Association. We want to be the home for the legal profession and a model for our communities, a place where all lawyers can find value and opportunity in abundance, where all lawyers can become better at their craft and connect to their passion, a place where you can forge relationships and connections that will last a lifetime. Let me thank the ABA Solo, Small Firm, and General Practice Division for producing this program. We appreciate your work to help lawyers in their practices. This work also contributes to our understanding of broader issues of law and justice. Let me also thank our co-sponsors, the ABA Commission on Immigration, and the Section of Civil Rights and Social Justice. Finally, I want to thank all of you, our attendees and panelists, for your support of the ABA and our profession by participating in this program. You make a difference. Thank you.
Now I'd like to take this time to introduce our distinguished panelists. We have Michelle Jacobson, Chair of the ABA Commission on Immigration and a partner in the Chicago office of Gilman, a global immigration law firm. Taylor Levy, our border expert and founder of Taylor Levy Law, specializing in border and asylum cases. Denise Gilman, clinical professor and co-director of the Immigration Clinic at the University of Texas School of Law. And Stephanie Baez, director of the Pro Bono at the ABA Commission on Immigration. I encourage you to read their full bios in the PDF document that was shared with you in the webinar chat box, I believe. And in addition to our panelists' full bios, in that PDF document, you'll also find materials and resources related to today's topics, including the ABA Commission on Immigration's premier publication on U.S. immigration enforcement at the border, as well as a report on electronic monitoring of migrants. Today's webinar will provide an overview of seeking asylum at the border and current border policies. Please note that the chat box is disabled during the webinar. However, feel free to type any questions that may arise in the Q&A box, and we will try to address some questions throughout the webinar and throughout the discussion. However, we have also set time aside for Q&A after the presentations. Now, to start, we thought it would be helpful to provide some background and context on the origins and root causes of migration, as well as an overview of why we are seeing people migrating and seeking asylum at the U.S.-Mexican border. And I'll now pass it on to Michelle Jacobson to kick things off for us.
Thanks so much, Valencia. It's a pleasure to be here. I will start by giving you all a bit of context for how we got here and understanding a bit more about immigration from the U.S. policy perspective. Immigration, I think, as we all know from seeing the news cycles in the media right now, it's a deeply divisive issue. I think it ranks a close second to the economy as being the #1 election issue right now, as we approach the polls in the next week. It's probably not only an election topic, but it's one that I think deeply divides us. Certainly, I think from what we have seen, and I will preface my remarks here as a practitioner who's been in immigration now for over 23 years, that it was remarkable to see in the last 4 years the number of border crossings that we had coming through at the time that the post-pandemic proclamations had ended. So it is true that the record borders crossings were hitting over 250,000 border crossings per month, and we had over 2.5 million border encounters in 2023 alone, which, as we look at the figures, was over half of what we had seen in 4 years prior. So it is true that under the Biden administration, we did see a peak of border crossings under that administration. But what isn't true is that the border is not chaotic. The border is hardly a situation now that we're seeing a porous type of free crossing situation that I think many of us are hearing in the news cycles today. If anything, in the last few months, and certainly under Biden's executive orders, we're seeing a full shutdown of asylum pathways, and we'll talk about that a bit more later on today. It's definitely very unfair to characterize the Biden administration's policies as being careless. If we're looking at the circumvention of lawful pathways programs and the executive orders that Biden had implemented over the last few months, we're definitely not seeing much of a substantive difference in terms of the border control mechanisms that have been put in place and the ones that were put in place by the Trump administration. I think situationally, as we look at those border numbers that I just mentioned, it's just very true that the border did spike in 2023, and we did see an increase in volumes of individuals coming through our borders. And I think that is the experiencing we are feeling today. But definitely, as I mentioned to our panelists just before we joined, we visited the border, the Commission on Immigration did last week in San Diego, and it was very telling to see how different the images are from the images I had seen in just the years prior, that the last time I had visited the border. It's definitely not true that there is this image of chaos at those border controls. We definitely saw some border control crossings being done through the ports of entry. We did not see anyone who was trying to attempt to climb those 30-foot scaled structures that we have along the Tijuana, San Diego side. And as we look at the numbers, it's very interesting to see that the detention facilities right now are not at capacity, and it's far from the image I think that we're being depicted in the media outlets today. I think for those who are unfortunate enough to not be able to secure one of those CBP appointments that we're going to talk about later, it's those individuals who are being detained right now, and that's largely due to access in technology and accessibility to that CBP One app. But what we really want to know is what's causing people to flee their homes. I can tell you right now that based on the stories and the countless individuals that we meet who cross those borders and are applying for asylum right now, is that they're leaving due to economic reasons and political unrest in their home countries. The ABA, the Commission on Immigration, is proposing a resolution soon that will be coming before our mid-year meeting that discusses climate change as a major factor that contributes to why individuals are fleeing their homes and looking to the US for a new opportunity. The reality is that they do not have a choice but to leave. We're hearing countless stories of people who are facing sacrifice and having stories of resiliency as they're being met across the border and having experienced so much hardship in just the border crossing alone. I think we need to understand from our country's perspective, how are we deciding who gets to stay within our borders? We have millions of individuals right now who are seeking asylum and are waiting for their court cases to be adjudicated. I think the last figure I'd seen was that we have over 4 million court cases in the dockets right now, and it's facing about a 2% chance of them getting approved. Most of the migrants that we have met in the last few years are seeing that their cases are not going to be adjudicated for at least another 3 years. And I think one estimate I'd seen from the National Association of Immigration Judges is that we would need to double the number of judges that we have right now to about 1,400 in order to clear the dockets by 2032. So for those people who are looking to remain in the US and were lucky enough to secure one of the CBP-1 applications to enter, I think it's important to understand that those are one of the few mechanisms that we have right now to enter the United States. We don't have any refugee resettlement programs situated outside in the southern hemisphere. And I think that's a very important element to consider when we're looking at why we have seen so much in the border crossing from the southern border perspective. And I think for us to really understand immigration, I have an often running joke with my friends and colleagues who aren't in immigration is that we really don't have a sensible immigration policy that supports the systems that we have to work. It's a very broken system. And I will give a shout out to the New York Times recent podcast that came out maybe just yesterday that talked extensively about our immigration policies and how we got here. Because I think it's important to understand that the individuals who are in this practice, we're working with a very complicated system, and it's a very nebulous practice that we are in. It's a myriad of agencies that we work with. We don't have one agency that we work with that is responsible for immigration. I can start to name a few. We have the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, who monitors our borders and detention facilities. We have our Customs and Border Protection, who is monitoring our borders from the port of entry standpoint and also the airport ports of entry. We have the Benefits Agency, which is known to many of us as USCIS. It's the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. We have the Department of Justice, who oversees our immigration court system. We also have the Department of State, who is responsible for issuing visas and administering our refugee programs. So from us, who are practicing in this area, I think from what we see, it's really the immigration policies that we work with are really a reflection of our politics at any given time. It's understanding that the origins of our immigration are really rooted in these sort of makeshift quotas that we've developed over the years, and a articulated desire to have a certain kind of immigration from a specific set of countries. If we look back at our origins, we see that in the early 1900s, we were looking to exclude those who are entering from Asia, and we're looking to preference those individuals who are coming in from Western or Northern Europe. But it's hardly a system that I think that is in much need of reform, and we haven't seen any significant reform in over 20 years. So where this leaves us essentially is to understand that with any of the intended presidential candidates, we're unlikely to see any shifts in terms of the asylum policy, and I hope we get into that a little bit more today in our discussion. If anything, we know from what President Trump has commented on terms of the border plans, he intends to shut down the border entirely if he's elected. He intends to institute a mass deportation of any individual who is already here in the United States, even those who are already obtaining a legal status. Those pathways that we'll talk about also later will be probably rescinded. And then we'll also see elements of what he's already planning to do based on what he's already done, such as a Muslim ban. That's something that we did see in the last administration, we're likely to see again. His playbook is pretty clear, I think, in terms of what he wants to do. From Vice President Harris's side, it should be somewhat of a similar policy to what President Biden was implementing. I think from what we have seen thus far in her comments that she's made in her rallies is that she's really interested in keeping the border secure. And she's really not looking to change the policies that are in terms of the humanitarian pathways that we have to offer. And we'll talk about those as well, about the temporary protective status and the deferred enforcement departures and humanitarian parole pathways that are available to individuals who are looking to stay within our borders. And we're seeing definitely a protectionist enforcement attitude in terms of what we're expecting from Vice President Harris's side. I think in terms of predictions of what's to come, I think we need to really grapple with this notion of the millions who are already here. What should we expect for them? What type of process should they expect in terms of a process that is not willing to grant them access to counsel? Many or very few individuals, I should say, are able to seek and obtain counsel at this time. we have to understand that the system as it stands right now really gives them only minutes to present their cases. And when you look at the CBP1 app, they're being decided within seconds, if not minutes, for them to decide whether or not they enter the United States to pursue their asylum claim. So ultimately, I think it's important to understand that the situation is not only complex, but it's full of political undertones that we have to grapple with and understand what we do in the move forward, and understanding further how the impact of the election cycle for next week will play a toll in how we adjudicate immigration cases moving forward.
Great. Did I cut you off, Michelle?
No, no.
Great, thank you. And yes, it's very complex, and thank you for just doing a summary of us and just letting us know what the reality is at the border, and providing a context for this discussion and what we can possibly see, in the future, depending on who wins the election. Now I'd like to just shift the conversation to address and provide a general overview of asylum law and current border policies now, and the process of seeking asylum at the border today. And I'll pass it on to Taylor Levy.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I usually like to start with a bit of a background of myself, just so it can explain like where I'm coming from. And sometimes the joke that I make is, if anything, I'm just like obsessed with the border and obsessed with asylum and the southern border. Sometimes I joke around that I'm the world's biggest busybody or meddlesome person, because I'm always just like, oh, wait, what's going on over there? What's going on over there? And then if you ask me lots of other things about the law, such as like the rules of evidence, I'm like, ooh, I don't know. There's exceptions, because if you don't know, the rules of evidence don't apply in immigration court. And so I forgot all of that from law school. I also want to say, just because I am barred in Texas, that I think I was called a specialist or specializing or an expert in and I can't actually say that because I am not a board certified specialist in Texas, but I am obsessed with the border. I've been doing this work first as a case manager since 2009 in El Paso, Texas, and then I got an alternate license called accreditation, where you can practice immigration law, and I was practicing in immigration court all throughout law school. So I did the hybrid program at Mitchell-Hamline University, which is a mostly online law school. It's the first ABA accredited online law school. It was amazing because El Paso does not have a law school. It's the largest city in the country without a law school, and it's one of the reasons why there is a lack of legal representation there, because folks tend to get jobs where they go to law school. So it was a great opportunity for me to be able to continue doing the work that I was doing while going to law school and continuing to practice and work on asylum issues. So I've been doing this work since 2009, like I said, but I've actually only been barred for 5 years. So if anyone ever looks me up and they're like, oh, you're a baby lawyer, you can't talk to me, like, makes sense, I get it. I'm always like, yeah, I am a baby lawyer. Don't ask me about rules of evidence. So when we're thinking about the border, I would say the biggest thing to know is that there's essentially two ways, basically, broadly, there are essentially two ways that somebody could seek asylum at the southern border or enter at the southern border. And that's going to be at a port of entry or in between ports of entry. So at a port of entry is what we're talking about going to a bridge. So airports are ports of entry as well. Anywhere where you're going to go to a bridge or a land crossing where someone can apply for admission to the United States. Basically knock on the front door, as we're always hearing, and say, hi, hello, I need safety, I need protection. And that is going to a port of entry to seek asylum. When I started doing this work as a caseworker in 2009, I'm in El Paso, Texas, very, very frequent for people to be able to go to the port of entry, say, hello, I need help, I need protection, I'm fleeing this kind of violence, etc., and to be able to get processed and seek asylum, because this is in our laws. This is stuff that has been enshrined in US law since post-World War II era, and various degrees of, Professor Gilman can correct me on all the different dates of everything, but this is part of our laws. This is part of our treaties and international obligations to allow people to seek asylum. Seeking asylum is a legal pathway, in my opinion, and there's obviously disagreements here, but that it is legal to seek asylum if you are on US soil or if you are seeking admission at a port of entry. So this was the norm, right? This is how people could generally go. They could go and ask for asylum at the ports of entry, the official border crossing points. And then starting in 2017, that's when the administration first started doing what's called metering. So the metering policy was originally Very true. This is not like just conspiracy, but it was very much targeted and started to specifically meter Haitian immigrants, Haitian asylum seekers in the Tijuana area to start. That's come out in discovery on the various court cases. There's emails about it, et cetera, where they would tell Haitian migrants, if they were seeking asylum at the port of entry, no, wait, come back later, we're full. So we have to meter or like make a line for how many people we let come in at a time. Other nationalities, they were still allowing through at the beginning. And then that's what the metering process was. And then that expanded and expanded. So metering started like 2016, 2017, primarily at the Tijuana port of entry, and then expanded across the entire border. So in El Paso, Texas, the day that metering started in El Paso, Texas, which is where there's agents standing at the ports of entry in the middle of the bridge before you touch US soil, saying, no, we're full, go wait in line, we can't take you now. The day that started was the same day that the Trump administration announced family separation as an official policy. So the same day that in El Paso, Texas, we had people being turned away at the bridge for the first time systematically was the same day they said, if you enter and seek asylum anywhere else, we're going to charge you with the federal misdemeanor of unlawful entry, and we are going to take your child away for committing that federal misdemeanor. So that's when metering started for El Paso and mostly for the rest of Texas as well. There were one-offs of metering before that. So kind of since then, since 2018 onwards, we've seen these officers posted at the middle of the bridges because the US side is over here, Mexican side is over here. The officers will be in the middle and they'll say, no, you cannot come. We're full, go wait in line. And then it's like, well, go wait in line where? What do you want me to do? Well, Mexico's a sovereign nation. You figure it out. And what would happen in the different Mexican cities, it would be very, very different what that metering would look like, what that line waiting would look like. So in El Paso, Ciudad Juarez, we had the state of Chihuahua take on the official list of running the metering list of how people could wait to get in. In Tijuana, the list was a literal composition notebook with handwritten names in it. In other areas, there were some nonprofits or churches who ran the list. These lists in every single area across the border got extremely, extremely corrupted, as you can imagine, because people would offer to pay to jump ahead in the list, or the cartels and organized crime who would run these different cities would force whoever was running the list to allow through specific people and allow them to jump the line, et cetera. And that has been consistent, including the ones that were state-run. And all of this officially had nothing to do with the US government. And so metering has continued to this day. And if you saw last week, the Ninth Circuit affirmed a lower court ruling about metering being illegal and metering not meeting our obligations under international law, but also under, US law under the INA. But even though that metering lawsuit was just won again at the Ninth Circuit, we still have metering to this day now in the form of the app. CBP1. CBP1 is the app that's created by the US government. It was created a few years ago, though, because it's a multifunctionality app. So if you look at like when was CBP1 created, it was several years ago. It was first used for like boating vessels, like boating vessels that go into international waters, I guess. But for these purposes, when we say CBP1, we mean at the border for being able to seek an appointment. So when the Biden administration came in to office, they decided to keep a policy called Title 42 in effect. And that policy was started by the Trump administration on March 20th, 2020. And that was because of the COVID pandemic. Title 42 is the public health code as opposed to the INA. So under the public health code, when we say Title 42 is a whole huge law, right? It's the public health code. But Title 42 means that the border is closed, allegedly. You can no longer seek asylum. You can no longer seek asylum at the ports of entry at all. Or if you enter outside of the ports of entry, which is the other way that people can go, you are just going to be kicked back to Mexico, pushed back to Mexico, and not allowed to seek asylum. However, we're going to go back to this area of Mexico's a sovereign nation. So when we're talking about the ports of entry, the agents stand right there, right on the line, and they say, go away, go away, go away. So that can be for any nationalities whatsoever. But during metering, during Title 42, and today, all of these iterations of the same basic policies means that it's impossible for people to go to the ports of entry, or it's effectively impossible for people to go to the ports of entry to seek asylum, and instead they choose alternate options. So when they choose alternate options, for a lot of people, for the vast majority of people who you're going to come across in your practice or who you see in like the news and the B-roll about the border being open, are people who are crossing the border right outside of a port of entry very frequently, sometimes in the shadow of the port of entry, and they're crossing the border that way instead, unofficially, potentially illegally, depending on how you look at the law and the fact that asylum is a legal right, and turning themselves into Border Patrol agents. The vast, vast majority of people who have crossed seeking asylum, yes, those have been unauthorized crossings, but they've been crossings usually in broad daylight with their children and immediately turn themselves into Border Patrol agents, not trying to abscond, not trying to evade detection, trying to turn themselves in and say, hello, I'm so-and-so, I'm from Venezuela, I'm seeking asylum, my country's a total mess, it's collapsing, I have been threatened, my family has been beaten, I've been shocked, all these horrible things, please can I have protection? Because I couldn't go to the port of entry. At the port of entry, there's an agent saying, no, 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 go away, go away, go away. Because when Title 42 went into effect, all of those metering lists went away because there were no longer any options. So that's what happens at the port of entry. But if you were able to get onto US soil during Title 42, I went in a bit of a circle, you could get sent back to Mexico without being allowed to seek asylum, but only if you were from certain nationalities. Because back to this whole Mexico's a sovereign nation, they would only accept certain nationalities back. And so at the beginning, it was Mexico and Central Americans. It later got expanded to include Venezuelans. It got expanded to include sometimes Nicaraguans, Cubans, Haitians, Venezuelans, or Nicaraguans as well. So we have that system in place. The Biden administration kept Title 42 in effect until May 11th of 2023. That's when Title 42 was lifted, and we instead shifted to the CLP, or the Circumvention of Lawful Pathways. That policy, once again, a very similar policy to the past, which will say that you can seek asylum. If you seek asylum at the port of entries, you can still qualify for asylum. But if you go any other way, then you are going to be barred from asylum unless you can establish some sort of an exception. So if anyone has any cases that are coming to your offices now and they entered on or after May 12th of 2023, because it went into effect at midnight, then those people are subject to the Circumvention of Lawful Pathways, and you have to try and fight against that if you're going to try and win asylum for them in court. When the CLP went into effect, nothing changed about the ports of entry. The ports of entry continued to be closed, such that the only way to seek asylum at the ports of entry was to use this app. The CBP One app is incredibly problematic. It's very, very difficult to use for a lot of people. It's only in English, Spanish, and Haitian Creole. It's not in French, it's not in Russian, it's not in Arabic. I was contacted recently by someone who was fully blind and cannot use the app. Even though the app is put forth by the US government, it doesn't have the proper ADA accessibility requirements. Also this morning, they just added a new pop-up in the app just this morning, because there's a glitch right now that if you accidentally have an extra space after your name, so if I type in Taylor Levy and the space bar accidentally, then the entire app will glitch and my registration will get canceled. So they just posted like a pop-up in the app of like, make sure you don't accidentally have an extra space. And those are just some of the examples of the app consistently failing. The other thing that we saw very, very clearly, and not conspiracy theory, Office of Inspector General has put this out, the app was very vulnerable to security threats and vulnerable to being taken over by hackers, bots, use of VPNs, so that people were able to buy appointments just the same way that I was saying that people could buy appointments on the metering lists, buy appointments on the CBP One app, without having to wait in line the same way as everyone else. And so we consistently have situations where I would hear about people paying between $6,000 to $10,000 for an appointment, where they would only have to wait like 1 to 2 days for their appointment, as opposed to other folks who are waiting many, many months. So the way it is right now, the waiting list, the waiting time for a CBP One appointment is 3 months on average. That's the number that the government puts out. It's between 2.5 to 3 months, whatever they put out. But the way the app works is some percentage of appointments per day, they won't tell us, are allotted on a lottery-based system. So it's just random luck. I could sign up for the app today. I'm going to win the lottery. I'll get an appointment right away. My appointment will be in 21 days. So I always have to wait at least those 21 days. And then the rest of the appointments are allotted on a chronological basis, which is how long you've been waiting. They won't give us the answers about what are the different percentages. We believe it's more heavily weighted towards the lottery, because part of the idea is if the line gets really, really long, no one would want to sign up for the line because they don't want to wait so long. So that's why the average that is told between the time of registration to the time of getting an appointment is about 2.5, 3 months. But what we consistently hear from people who are actually waiting is we hear consistently people saying they're waiting 8, 9, 10 months before their appointment, because those are presumably the people who have not gotten lucky and won in the lottery. Officially, the administration tells us that the algorithm does not have any special algorithmic weighting that they put into it for nationality or any of those things, but there's always kind of rumors that are flying. And lots of times people will make mistakes in the app and their registrations will get canceled and they'll have to restart. So we see this in particular. There's lots of problems with the facial recognition software, particularly with dark-skinned people, Black people, where the system will not recognize their faces, sometimes won't. There was a big issue for a while. They did fix this, wouldn't recognize babies' faces, because you have to have your eyes open to be able to use the app, because they use facial recognition software. And if the babies were asleep, you could not get their faces recognized, particularly babies with darker complexions. Or if your toddler was mad and didn't want to smile during the picture, during these live selfies, all of these types of problems. I got called about a case the other day where the man's name, let's say, my name's Taylor Christine Levy, but a lot of people have 4 names, right? So he only put, for example, on his registration, Taylor Levy. He didn't put the word Christine. He didn't put his second name, his middle name. Because of that, they weren't allowing him to go to his appointment, even though he had, his ID, everything else showing that he was who he was. Just super consistently see all these issues. So you're trying to wait in Mexico now for, however long, 3 months on the low end, if that's the official administration stats. And then that's until you get your appointment. So we're talking another 21 days on top of that. So maybe 4 months. And how much more time do I have, Valencia? I'm I'll talk forever. I was I got 5 minutes at least, right? We're good?
Yeah, couple little
Okay.
moments.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you'll be waiting for your appointment. What is happening then? You are going to be at constant threat of kidnapping, extortion, and just generalized violence as a migrant during that waiting period. One of the things that is a quote I gave various times throughout, from the very beginning of first Remain in Mexico, migrant protection protocols, then Title 42, that I'm a mom myself, and the very last place I would ever want my children to be would be at a migrant shelter. And I say that statement at the same time as being someone who deeply, deeply values all of the people who work so hard at migrant shelters to run these shelters. I worked extensively in the shelters. I had an old beat up Jeep and I would drive around to all the different shelters. I drove around Senator Ron Wyden. That was really fun. And his team and my beat up Jeep. We ended up taking a pregnant woman in the Jeep with us from one of the shelters because she had preeclampsia and was about to go into early labor. And that was during Title 42. And we got the senator to help us get her across the bridge and exercise her legal rights to seek asylum. And anyway, that was a side note that I got distracted on. But despite all of that, the shelters end up being kidnapping hubs. They end up being hubs of violence, not necessarily in the shelters, but outside. And so if you leave the shelters and you have to go to the doctor, to go to the tiendita, the store, to get diapers, those types of things, when you leave, that is so frequently when migrants are targeted for kidnapping. So even though I work extensively with the shelters and I really trust and respect the shelters and the work that they're doing, they are hardcore targeted by organized crime. And all of this boils down to the fact that almost every inch of the US-Mexico border, I obviously can't say this definitively, is controlled or owned by different factions of different Mexican cartels. They own and control that specific area, that specific land. And so when someone is seeking asylum outside of a port of entry because they can't go to the ports of entry, they can't go to the bridges anymore, effectively, even when really horrible things happen. I'm talking like we would try and go, you know, I tried to go with like a 17-year-old lesbian from Honduras who was in one of the shelters who I really like, and they do good work, but they're very Christian shelter, and everyone was being horrible to her because of her queerness. She was getting very badly targeted, etc. I took her to the port of entry during Title 42. I tried to get her across, She's a 17-year-old kid, and we were denied. And we were denied, even though I'm a pretty high profile lawyer in this realm, even though I knew what I was doing, I could call all the big bosses. We were denied and denied and denied during Title 42. And that is still the story that happens today. I would say the number one thing that I'm doing right now is just telling lawyers across the country, yeah, that sounds bad. Yeah, they're not going to be able to get across. Oh, it was denied. Oh, they were told at the port that there's no options. Yeah. So frequently we're in a position where people don't need to turn to us as attorneys. They need to turn to other options to be able to seek asylum in another way, because the kidnappings and the risks in Mexico as migrants are so incredibly high that it's astronomical. And part of that, going back to this idea of ownership, of the cartels owning the different areas of the border, we're seeing this really big shift since CBP1 went into effect, where the cartels are saying, okay, you're not going to pay me what you would have paid me to enter illegally. You're now going to pay me a tax, an extortion, for the right to be able to go to your CBP1 appointment. And you've just waited 10 months for this appointment, and your whole life depends on being able to go to this appointment, you're going to find the money to pay. And so people are getting extremely systematically kidnapped on the way to their appointments, at the bus stations, on the way to from the shelters, on the way to the actual ports of entry, etc., getting kidnapped that way. And if anybody can't wait any longer, if they're running from the kidnappers, if they have no other option and they're going to try and cross in between ports of entry, once again, we're seeing where the cartels are like, but I own this area. You have to pay me some amount of money, even if you're going to turn yourself in broad daylight. So I was talking to a lawyer this morning who said her client's mother was murdered in front of him because they tried to cross in an area where they had not paid the proper tax or fee to the cartels that controlled that area, because they were just trying to cross and seek asylum without having paid the proper fees to the people who control that general area. So we're just consistently in a situation where, as attorneys, there's not much we can do for people who want to be able to cross. The people who do make it through, when we're talking about safety, when we're talking about securing the border, what we have consistently seen extremely commonly is we've seen more and more people turning to organized crime routes that will get them through undetected, that will allow people to cross the border without getting caught, without turning themselves into border agents. Because when we have a system where people can seek asylum, they can express, look, I'm an asylum seeker, I need to be processed, then they're going to do that. They're going to turn themselves in. People do not want to hide and sneak and do these things and have to work with organized crime. They beg me I want to go to the port of entry. I want to ask for help. Look, I have all my proof. I have my dead family. Look, I have my finger cut off. All of these things, please. And I'm like, I'm sorry, there's no options. We'll try, but we're going to get denied. But we'll try. And of course, there's exceptions every once in a while. But more and more people are telling me that their choice now is to try to get through undetected, getting through without getting apprehended, because they have to do everything possible to protect themselves and protect their families and protect their children. And what that means is getting through undetected means higher smuggling routes, means paying these same organized crime groups much more money, much higher rates, to try and get through in these incredibly dangerous ways. When we see the deaths in the big semi trucks of everybody packed in, paying huge amounts of bribes to, US officials sometimes as well to kind of let these vehicles through. And we see those arrests pretty constantly, of border agents and also of the Texas Guard. I don't know if you've seen that there's a lot who have been arrested. There was a contractor for unaccompanied minors who was recently arrested with a whole busload of people with a fake manifest. And we see this consistently because people feel like there's no other options. And so yes, border crossing numbers have gone down unequivocally. There has been success in the statistics, but the human costs the degree to which we're seeing just like astronomical kidnapping rates, the degree to which I'm being told about people being intentionally pushed off the border wall so that they will fall and create a medical emergency to distract border agents and make them respond to that area where the smugglers have just pushed people off the wall, usually kidnapping victims, and they push them off the wall intentionally. So Border Patrol has to go to that area so the same cartel can maybe get through some people undetected in this area. We're creating a system where the border is so incredibly violent, is so incredibly dangerous that the people with control are organized crime. They're not the attorneys. They're not the border agents. And this has been consistently from Trump administration policies and onwards towards Biden administration policies. And so, yes, numbers have gone down, but the safety and security on the border, when we talk about securing the border, has not. What we've seen is just so much more money and influence pouring into organized crime. And so that was maybe too much. I talked too much, hopefully not. And I will pass it on to Professor Gilman.
Thank you, Taylor. To me, you're my local border expert. I always learn something new when I hear you speak. So thank you for sharing. It's appalling to hear the challenges that asylum seekers are facing at the border. And Professor Gilman can continue this discussion and touch on, human rights concerns and at the border and detention centers.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to everybody for offering this opportunity. What I'd like to do is try to bring some of what Michelle and Taylor have been saying, which is so incredibly important, kind of into the human rights framework, and then also talk a little bit about the human rights consequences, what's happening to folks who do make it through, quite possibly after having experienced significant violence of the type that Taylor described. So the first thing I want to just kind of put a finger on is the fact that there is xenophobia and racism underlying much of this policy at the border. The restrictive border policies are both based in, kind of created as a result of ideas about those who are approaching the border as being dangerous, threats, possibly a drain on public resources or likely to engage in criminal activity. But none of those tropes are actually based in reality. They are simply based on race and fear of other at the border. Numerous studies show that, in fact, migrants are engaged in criminal activity at lower rates than native-born U.S. Citizens. They do not qualify for almost any public benefits in ways that are, in fact, very marginalizing of individuals who are just trying to seek safety here and get on their feet and who have every intention of contributing to the U.S. economy. And there are many other ways in which the picture that is drawn up of those who are arriving at the border just doesn't meet with reality. And so it's hard to explain it other than through a racialized lens. And then it's not just that border policies are adopted given those problematic framings, but that then the really restrictive, harsh policies that push people into danger, that prevent people from seeking asylum, are justified on the grounds that they are necessary because of the crisis or threat situation. So it's sort of this vicious cycle of the policies are put into place based on ideas of who is coming to the border. People still come because they're actually fleeing extreme danger in their home countries, and then that's seen as a crisis that justifies even more harsh policies over and over again. And to put this in a bit of a framework too, this isn't just a question of sort of moral obligation. The US has ratified various international human rights instruments, including the Refugee Convention, which says that we need to offer asylum to individuals who are fleeing danger, and that we have codified into US law. But we've also signed on to other international instruments, such as the Convention on Civil and Political Rights, the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, all of which are relevant here, and most of which do have their partner in US law. And so this is something that we should be taking very seriously generally, but somehow when it comes to the border, we allow ourselves this carve out, this exceptionality, and think that policymakers tend to think that everything is game at the border, even when it clearly violates these U.S. and international law obligations. And maybe it's out of a sense that the border is sort of unmanageable, but I really want to echo what Michelle said, and maybe even offer just a tiny bit of additional context about what's happening at the border, that suggests that in fact it's entirely manageable if we put the resources and political will into it. As Michelle mentioned, we had a really high period in which we were seeing sometimes hundreds of thousands of individuals presenting themselves over a month, and in the 2 million range for a year-long period. But you know what? Every single day, according to Border Patrol statistics, the U.S. Border Patrol processes at ports of entry 500,000 people every day. Now, these are not all immigrants. Some are citizens coming back and forth. Some are tomato truck drivers coming back and forth. Some are temporary or permanent visa holders. But the point is, we know how to process people at the border. We're just saying that because we do not like the characteristics of those who are coming, and we've created this narrative of crisis and fear and threat, that we don't want to treat that set of individuals seeking protection in this country in the same way we treat others that just need to be processed in a humane, fair, and dignified fashion. It's also really worth remembering that while the numbers have been relatively high in recent years, it's not extreme highs. In 2000, we also saw over 1 million border crossers that year, so compared to 2 million now. But 25 years have passed. The world is bigger, and it's certainly more global than it was 25 years ago. People are able to travel and communicate in ways that they were not in the past. And in addition, we're seeing really, really significant human rights situations in countries around the world that are forcing people to flee to the southern border. The United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees has said again and again that we are in a refugee crisis that the world has not seen, at least since World War II, when we saw massive displacement across the globe. And so that's part of the explanation of why we're seeing high numbers now. And so restrictive measures are not going to ever halt arrivals at the border, given what is sending people and given the globalized world that we live in. And so when we get into this constant cycle of seeing that those arrivals as a threat, then we don't actually take the measures that would be appropriate to take to handle arrivals at the border in a way that would be fair and humane, but also would recognize the reality of this flow as sort of a normal flow that can be handled if we recognize what people are coming for. And as Taylor mentioned, I want to mention that so then not only are we engaging in kind of human rights violations at the border in terms of restricting access to asylum, in terms of adopting restrictive border policies that are based in race and xenophobia, but we're creating additional violence that also involves human rights violations at the southern border. So that's kind of the framing of the border. But then I do want to talk for a minute about what happens to individuals who manage to go ahead and take that route of crossing without a CBP-1 app, since that's the only appointment, which is the only way to actually cross officially at a port of entry. Under current rules now, what happens to them when they make their way into the United States and attempt to claim asylum. And Taylor already talked about some of the reality for those individuals in terms of new rules adopted in 2023 and 2024, which make it very, very difficult for those persons to actually achieve a grant of asylum. So even if they make it in, and now they're in the process, theoretically, of being able to make a claim for asylum, it's extremely unlikely that they will be able to succeed because there are these new bans on asylum. The Biden administration has talked about it as shutting down the border. It isn't really the case. People are always going to cross. People are crossing now. That's inevitable. What it is that people are no longer entitled to relief. So what does that mean? Entitled to protection, asylum. What does that mean? It means that they may be deported back to danger in their home countries, or they may remain in the United States in a limbo status without any opportunity to integrate into our communities, which is also not helpful for them or for our communities. And specifically what those bans do is they prevent people from qualifying for asylum if they don't use the CBP-1 app to make the appointment, except in very, very limited circumstances. And if you can't show those exceptions to the requirement of use of the CBP-1 app, you would only be eligible for lesser forms of protection that are sort of related to asylum, called withholding of removal or protection under the Convention Against Torture. But those forms of protection do not create any pathway to lawful permanent residency or to citizenship, and they do not allow people to bring their family members who may remain in danger in home country. So they are absolutely not a substitute for asylum. But even then, to even get to the point where you're able to make a real claim, either for asylum based on an exception to the rules or to make a claim for withholding, almost everyone who crosses over irregularly into the United States gets put into what's called expedited removal and is also put into detention. What this means is they're either going to remain in a Border Patrol facility, which is really problematic because these are not locations that are intended for people to stay for more than 72 hours, if that. And this includes families with small children are being forced to stay in these Border Patrol facilities while they undergo this screening, or they are sent to an ICE detention center, which is a prison, while they undergo a screening to determine whether or not they will even have an opportunity to present their asylum claim, or whether they will be actually expeditedly removed. In other words, very quickly, within a matter of weeks, return to their home country that they just fled because of extreme danger. So that's what happens to somebody who manages to cross into the United States. Is first they must undergo this screening from within a detention setting for the most part, before they can then even have a chance to present their claim in the long backlogged adjudication system that Michelle mentioned. And many, many people are getting turned away in that initial screening, are getting sent home. That is a very serious reality, that families with kids who fled extreme violence, sometimes state violence in countries like Venezuela or Nicaragua, are getting returned home immediately without even having a real chance to put on their asylum claims. For those who pass that screening interview, if they're adults, they may well remain in ICE detention throughout their entire case while they present their claim to asylum in immigration court. So for a year or more, while they present their claims. There are well-documented human rights violations, abuses in immigration detention centers in the United States. Everything such as lack of any kind of meaningful attorney access, lack of adequate health care, even for serious conditions, overuse of segregation, in other words, solitary confinement, yes, of asylum seekers who have committed no crime, at least under any understanding of the right to seek asylum, who may remain in detention centers and face these egregious conditions that have been found by almost every human rights body to look at them to be deeply, deeply problematic. Yet that is the reality of what many individuals are facing. I have a client right now who was tortured in his home country in Central America. Actually, I'll state it, it's El Salvador, because there are well-documented state-sponsored incidents of torture in El Salvador right now that our U.S. State Department recognizes very well. But he's been in detention for 1 year. He's been placed in solitary confinement. He has lost his case despite the clear evidence, and now we're on appeal, and he may be detained for additional months in this setting, and he is not receiving treatment for very serious PTSD and other healthcare considerations. So that's just the kind of example of who we're seeing in detention. Another reality is family separation. Still, not the exact model that we saw in 2018 under President Trump, although recently, and others may speak to this, some concerns that at least some similar types of cases are taking place right now. I've heard this from several sources now. But even leaving that aside, what we are absolutely seeing and have been seeing all along is situations where, for example, a grandmother brings a young child to safety, seeking safety at the border, and is separated because that's not a custodial parent. Where an integral family of 4, mother, father, 2 kids, comes to the border. Dad is sent to an immigration detention center, and mom and kids might actually be released at the border. You're seeing people try to use the CBP-1 app that Taylor mentioned with all of its problems, and they don't get all 4 family members an appointment for whatever reason, some glitch, and they're forced to separate so that at least some family members can use that CBP-1 app appointment and make their way to safety in the United States. So this is another obviously very serious human rights situation that we're seeing as a result of policies at the border. And then a last one that I want to mention in terms of serious human rights situations that we're seeing as a result of border policy is the widespread use of electronic monitoring, which includes ankle monitors, sort of like the same kind that you see, not sort of like the same kind that you see in the criminal legal system, as well as phone app, constant surveillance and constant check-in facial recognition requirements. This is for people who are within the United States, who maybe were detained and then were released from detention, but still have this very extensive monitoring at all times and every moment of their location, which is a deprivation of liberty for those individuals, as well as people who might be released with that monitoring from the border without going to an ICE detention center in some circumstances. Immigration detention deprivations of liberty are supposed to be, by US and international human rights standards, non-punitive. This is supposed to be, in theory, a way of ensuring that people appear for their hearings. And if it's not necessary for that, then it shouldn't be used, whether it's detention or whether it's electronic monitoring. But it is being used across the board for almost everybody, one or the other, detention or surveillance. And so that is a serious civil and human rights violation. And then just to close out, because I know we want to try to finish up and get to questions, I just want to emphasize again that there is sometimes a misimpression that all of this is happening to folks who've sort of made the choice to come to the border rather than pursuing some other lawful means of arriving in the United States. And so it's important to note that there really are no legal ways, lawful pathways to come to the United States for the vast majority of people in general, migrants who wish to come to the United States, but certainly for those who are coming to seek protection. As Michelle mentioned, it is not the case that you can just seek asylum or refugee resettlement, which is kind of the same idea, but from abroad, from most countries in Latin America. You can't seek refugee resettlement, and you can never seek asylum in your home country. The only way you seek asylum is by getting on US soil, getting to the border or inside the United States. So that's really important to understand. And then there are other pathways that theoretically are based on family or employment, but in the US legal system, immigration legal system, those are very, very, very limited, both in terms of who fits and then in terms of the numbers. So those are not real options for most people who would be seeking asylum. And so while people might, in theory, be both asylum seekers, but also attempting to reunite with family in the United States, they may be forced into the asylum channel because there simply is no other pathway open for them. Statuses like the temporary protected status or a temporary program that has been put in place recently to parole in from abroad certain Venezuelans, Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans are just that, temporary. They do not provide any pathway to permanent residency or citizenship. They typically are good only for about a year, and then they expire and may or may not be renewed depending on what's happening in the administration. Those are not pathways that are alternatives to asylum as a means of seeking safety and permanent protection and integration in the United States. So that's really important to understand as well. And with that, I'll pass along at this point. Yeah, I don't know who it goes to next.
Professor Gilman, there are some great questions coming in the Q&A box. We are not going to forget about them. We'll definitely address them at the end. And yes, thank you, Professor Gilman. And these issues and concerns are just border issues. You know, they're nationwide issues. And if Michelle, can you briefly touch on just the impact of border policies on our communities and the importance of legal advocacy?
Definitely. Thanks, Valencia. I so appreciate my colleagues' presentation thus far, because I think as I see them get really animated about the realities of what we're seeing in immigration, I think it really enlightens the fact that how difficult the situation is for most of us who see this day in, day out. And I think we can't underscore just the complexities of it all. And I hope we haven't inundated you with too much information that it becomes unmanageable, because I think from our standpoint, I think it's best to educate everyone on these issues in a way that makes sense for you to really understand sort of the reality behind the numbers and the process being so complex and so difficult. If we haven't really been able to capture sort of the nuance and the violence that individuals are already fleeing and the challenges that they're facing from the time they leave their home countries, the time they arrive in the US, to the time they arrive in cities like Chicago and New York, which I'll talk about in 2 seconds, it really, really captures it in terms of the whole trajectory just being so difficult. And I hope we've been able to at least make that point known to all of you today. If you walk away from one thing, it's just that the process is far from difficult. And I just want to comment quickly on Denise's earlier point about the legal immigration pathways, because so many of the humanitarian pathways we've talked about thus far are temporary and could easily be removed by the next administration. Subject to the political will of the general public, and understanding really where we sit in terms of what those pathways are. It's really important for me to explain, because I practice in the sort of legal immigration space, if you will. That's really the best way to call it, in that I do most of my day-to-day responsibilities within those visa applications that you would apply for to receive from both an employment perspective and a family-based perspective. And it's very difficult, the process in general. So I can't even understate that enough, because when we're talking about where individuals are looking to come to the US for opportunities, it's not an easy pathway. And many times you can't even do it without hiring a lawyer to sort of help you navigate through those pathways and really understand sort of the complexities that are involved in the whole makeshift system that we have here. So I did want to turn our focus to really kind of talking about Chicago. I'm from Chicago. I live in Chicago, and I think it's really important to sort of encapsulate what has happened in the last year from the perspective of someone who is from this area and has been practicing in this area, to really understand sort of what happened to the number of immigrants who arrived in the most recent year based on those numbers I was talking about earlier. And I think it really helps to highlight sort of the mood of what the general public feels right now in terms of how they feel about immigration. I think Chicago is a great example of that, in that we in the city alone experienced an influx of over 50,000 migrants that arrived in the last year alone. Many of them were bused from cities like in Texas. They were coming from Florida. They were being really sent to us deliberately with the notion that Chicago is one of the, so-called sanctuary cities, that we were, the friendly blue city that was going to welcome the immigrants as best as possible. But the way in which they arrived, of course, they were being bused in the middle of the night, really left the city with much of its resources already constrained. And to top it off, we were having these arrivals come at any given time with very little notice for us to prepare. And what we saw then is within our own communities, we saw individuals who were now homeless, living on our streets on top of our already existing homeless problem. We had individuals sleeping at the police stations, setting up tents outside of the police stations, and essentially turned our city upside down with just the number of immigrants that we had in a short period of time. So we had a panel very recently during the ABA annual meeting in August, where we had the city of Chicago come in. The deputy mayor spoke, and she really gave us a really interesting insight to how that mobilization effort really worked from behind the scenes. And I think it's very enlightening to hear just how often they spoke to the federal government looking for support, looking for financial support to really be able to support the communities of the influx of immigrants who had just recently arrived, and being able to scramble to find housing solutions for them now, for their family members. And I think even from a community perspective, we were all very shocked to go from, you know, my day-to-day shopping at the grocery store at the Jewel here nearby. I would regularly see individuals asking for help, donations for food and diapers and basic necessities that individuals, it really broke my heart. And I remember so vividly this time last year within my firm, we were really worried that many of the individuals who were coming in from Texas and had fled from their home countries in Venezuela really were so ill prepared for the winter for Chicago. And as everybody knows, Chicago has pretty brutal winters. So we saw them outside of the Jewel with flip-flops and shorts. And we said to ourselves, like, we've got to do something here, because we can't have them, as our temperatures are plummeting right now, we're about to all bring out our winter coats. Like, these individuals had nothing. I mean, if we're talking about basic necessities not being met, they certainly didn't have clothing items to prepare for that winter shelter. So that was really where I think it was very shocking for us to see the number of individuals who had arrived in just that short period of time, and really understanding how much effort it took, not only from a nonprofit or organizations who were really looking to chip in to help with feeding the individuals who were arriving, and the city who was really looking for that, not only the additional funding, but really looking to remobilize individuals who were needing that additional support. And I think certainly now that we're a bit more settled in terms of a process and how we acclimate individuals who are arriving, and they are still arriving, I think from a perspective of where we could contribute, we were looking at ways in which I think the community could really help to manage the individuals who were needing that sort of basic elementary support, right? So as we kind of look across the room at where the immigrants now are settling within Chicago, we're seeing a lot of nonprofit organizations not only turning their attention to providing those resources where they can in terms of ESL support for individuals who don't speak the language, and especially as we look even at the resources that the city needed to provide, because many of those children who were arriving had not been in school for quite some time and were needing that additional support. So the city of Chicago really had to look for additional financial resources to be able to provide those basic needs. From a legal perspective, I think it was very interesting to see the coordination effort that happened within the city with our nonprofit organizations that we work with regularly, and also with coordination with the USCIS, who was able to give us more expedited biometrics appointments. So for many of the Venezuelans who had arrived to Chicago, we were able to do regular legal clinics for them, and the city would bus in the individuals coming in from the shelters to be able to submit their applications in person with pro bono attorney assistance. And I think this might be a perfect opportunity to turn it over to Stephanie to talk about pro bono resources for those who are looking to help. But I did just want to end my comments and mention that really in terms of ways in which individuals can really support, I think it's really important to highlight what Denise was mentioning in terms of the humanity behind what is happening right now, because as we look across the room and understand there's so much negativity in terms of understanding what the populations are experiencing, it's the only thing that we can do at this point is to help those who are already here. And whether it's providing them access to resources, access to those basic needs, I think what's important to underscore, and this is probably my best transition for Stephanie, is that the representation matters, especially as ABA practitioners, in not only in immigration, but as lawyers. I think that representation can increase the quality of that representation and the ability for that person to succeed in their immigration court case. It's exponential. I think the outcomes are 5 times the amount of success rates with having an attorney representative be present at your court case will increase your chances tenfold.
Yes, great. And this is a great segue into how you here today can get involved and support these efforts. And I'll let Stephanie highlight some opportunities.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. It has been a really great discussion so far, and I know that everyone listening has heard all of these different, the need to help this population is so great. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how you can get involved if you are interested in doing that. And thank you to Michelle and Valencia for kind of teeing up this call to action. I am the director of pro bono for the ABA Commission on Immigration, and the Commission on Immigration, underneath the umbrella of the Commission on Immigration, we have 3 organizations that are operate at the border. So there's one in San Diego, that's the Immigration Justice Project, that serves migrants here in San Diego who are detained or who are seeking asylum or in removal proceedings in San Diego. We also have an organization called ProBar, which is in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley. And that serves individuals who cross through and are in the Rio Grande Valley who need assistance with their removal defense, and also helps with a lot of children who are in ORR shelters across the Rio Grande Valley. And then also under the umbrella of the Commission on Immigration, we have the Children's Immigration Law Academy, which is in Houston. There's CILA for short. And CILA really focuses on capacity building and putting out expert resources to help pro bono attorneys and other practitioners. A lot of their resources are specific to helping advocates who are working on behalf of children in the immigration area, but also so many of their resources are really broadly applicable that they can help anyone who might be interested in learning more about immigration. So I'm going to share there's some links for you all in the handout that has been sent around that links to our sign up form where you can learn more about pro bono projects, and also links to some of the resources that are available for free. So just so you know that those links are in the materials that you've received. But after explaining a little bit more about the Commission on Immigration, I'm going to jump into some of our available opportunities, but I also just want to hit a little bit more on the importance of pro bono and why it matters so much. When you heard others say that this representation makes a huge difference, sometimes people aren't aware that there is no right to government-funded counsel in immigration court. So while people can hire attorneys or have attorneys, there's no attorneys that are provided for them by the government in removal proceedings. And as the numbers have grown and the backlog has grown and the need is so great, the number of people who are represented dwindles. And I think that right now, it's approximately 30% of people in removal proceedings in immigration court are represented. And like Michelle said, having an attorney makes a huge difference. It's, let's see, I think the statistic I have here is from 2023, December of 2023, but that more than 3/4 of the people who've been removed, were ordered removed, did not have representation. And you know, the numbers, it's such a drastic difference when you have an attorney who's there to assist you. Because for the individuals, we've just talked for over an hour about immigration court and or immigration law and proceedings, and I'm sure many people's heads are spinning because it's really complex. This is really intense, even for people who are practicing immigration. Things change constantly. You know, the laws are constantly moving and evolving, and you know, it's really hard to grasp what's going on and what you would need to succeed in your immigration case. And now, of course, if you're someone who's just come over, you don't speak English, you are trying to figure out a way to economically support yourself and your family. You don't understand the court system. It's all a completely, in addition to being a literal foreign language, it's just a completely foreign system. And you have to figure out what you need to do and how you need to apply and what arguments you're supposed to put forward in order to stay in the country. It's really, really a daunting task. One of the things that I think really illustrates it is for someone who's seeking asylum, it's not enough for them to show that they were harmed in their home country, that they were persecuted in their home country. They have to show that that persecution occurred on account of a protected ground, and there's 5 protected grounds. Without getting into asylum law too much, just that bridge, that on account of piece, that's something that we can train pro bono attorneys that this is what you need to show. And as attorneys, we know that. When you are a migrant who's come across, you just know, I've been harmed. This is what happened to me. And don't know that even just by saying that and putting forward your case and your evidence about what's been hurt, how you've been hurt, you're missing this huge element of what you need to show to be able to legally win your case. So it is just having someone who's able to advocate for you and really help explain the immigration system and what it is that is needed to win a case is extremely important. And also, it's a big benefit to people who engage in pro bono for the volunteers themselves. In addition to helping people and just the general, amazing goodwill and how wonderful it feels to be able to help someone. Also, when you engage in pro bono, you are able to learn new skills. If you are new to law and you haven't litigated before and you're nervous about being in front of a judge, or you're, you want to practice more time working with clients or whatever it might be, when you engage in pro bono, you're able to practice those skills and have the mentorship of experts who work at the nonprofit organizations that are helping you. And they can answer your questions. They can give you guidance. They can help you with your brief writing. They can help you with your presentation skills to the court. There's so many benefits that come from engaging in pro bono. You can gain mentorship, just mentor attorneys who might be there to mentor you throughout your legal career. So I really do encourage people to get involved. And I think that oftentimes people are scared of engaging in immigration pro bono because it is so daunting, because it's you have someone's life that you are, that depends on you and your representation. But people forget that you're not comparing yourself to an expert immigration attorney who's been doing this for 35 years, who knows all the ins and outs. You're comparing yourself to no one, to having no counsel. And so even just by, having an understanding of how the US legal system works, you are really helping someone just with that knowledge. Even if you had nothing else in there, you're helping someone move forward with that. And most organizations, if you find a volunteer opportunity, will provide mentorship and will help guide you throughout the course of your representation. And so with that, I'll talk a little bit more about the pro bono projects that we offer within the Commission on Immigration. The first thing we offer is opportunities to do direct representation, to represent someone in their full asylum case, to help someone who might be detained in immigration detention seek release from their detention. And there's opportunities for you to be that person's attorney, to enter an appearance, to go into court with them and help them with their whole case. We have those opportunities in San Diego. We have them in the Rio Grande Valley. And also, if you look on the Children's Immigration Law Academy website, CILA, they have opportunities nationwide where you can help children and youth who are in immigration proceedings. When you help someone, if you're doing direct representation with the commission, we offer weekly office hours where our volunteers go and they can ask questions and talk about what's going on in their case, and we provide mentorship. We also do one-on-one mentorship. We review documents. We help answer questions. We provide guidance about the court that you might be in and the judges that you might be in front of. So we really make sure that anyone who is stepping up to volunteer, what you need to bring to the table is the willingness to be there and to do the work, and we will help guide you every step of the way so that you're comfortable with your representation. Also, sometimes people are not available for full scope representation. We understand that that really is a big commitment. So we also have some projects for what we call limited scope or bite-sized pro bono, where you can get involved with helping someone at a legal clinic. We operate a number of legal clinics that help people seek their employment authorization documents. We also have legal clinics that help people with their asylum applications, where you can learn about this area of law. You go and you help with the clinic, which is a discrete, maybe for the employment authorization documents, that might take you a half hour, and you can do a couple of them in the afternoon. Asylum, you might do a couple different clinic sessions to help one person complete their application, but you don't you're not a representative of this person in court. The person is going to be self-represented, but you've helped set them up for success in their applications for their relief or other benefits that they might be entitled to. We also, within the Commission on Immigration, lead group trips at the border, and these are for groups that are really interested in coming down and learning more about the situation at the border and seeing it firsthand. So these are all a few different types of the projects that we have going on right now. You can sign up using the interest form that is in the documents that you have in your materials. I will also say that we are constantly trying to bring in new projects, and part of our pro bono philosophy is really to remain nimble so that we're able to respond to whatever the need is when as the situation changes. And that's something that we are working on, especially keeping in mind how things might go with the election. And I just want to say to everyone, regardless of where you get involved in pro bono, If there is a specific issue that's in the news and you want to help with it, just be a little bit patient with the organizations that are putting on those pro bono programs. Sometimes it happens that there's an issue, it hits the news, and suddenly organizations are inundated with volunteers who want to help, which is amazing. We love having that enthusiasm, but also sometimes then it takes a little while to build up the program and get it going. So especially just in coming months, if there are issues that become hot button issues in immigration or elsewhere that you want to get involved in, just to find organizations, you can go to your state and local bar orgs and see what organizations are local to you that have issues. And I would just say, please be a little bit patient with the organizations and also keep coming back. Even when that issue has faded from the news, it's still important, it's still going on, and the organizations still need help. So, even once we're done with this election cycle and things have kind of faded, it's your help is still incredibly important and meaningful. So I think I'll stop with that and pass it back to Valencia.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for highlighting those opportunities. I did want to take some time to address some Q&A in the chat. If Taylor, if I can give you a two-part question so we can get as much questions answered, is one, there was a mention of screening, and I think, those are referred to as credible fear interviews. If you can briefly explain, what that is and comment on that. And then also, we have someone ask is, how can you overcome the CLP rule, the circumvention of lawful pathways rule? It looks like this practitioner has used the exception based on immediate harm, but has not received any decisions on those cases. And so that was another question presented, if you can touch on that.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much. Yeah, I wanted to touch on just the credible fear interviews a little bit, because I think that it's very easy for folks who don't do this work to kind of think of it as a very common sense solution, right? We've seen credible fear interview passage rates in the 2000s were literally 99%, versus nowadays we're seeing a credible fear passage rate of under 50%, 40%. So it's easy to look at those numbers and be like, oh, it's because everyone's liars. They used to be real asylum seekers and now they're not. But that's not the case. What the case is that the way in which we interpret people's fear has gotten incredibly much more stringent, particularly since June 5th with the securing the border rule. So we created a whole new evidentiary standard, which is called, instead of reasonable possibility, we now have reasonable probability. And reasonable probability is a term that has no case law on it, has no real definition. It's just a higher standard in terms of people being able to pass these initial interviews. And these initial interviews are done unscheduled. So even if you do have an attorney, the attorney cannot pre-schedule the appointment or the interview. The interviews take between 2 to 4 hours. They happen 7 days a week, including Saturdays and Sundays, and including federal holidays. I'd helped someone who had one on 7 a.m. on Thanksgiving last year. They're a 2 to 4 hour interview. You don't get to pre-schedule it. And so the only way you can actually represent your client in this is pretty much to give them your cell phone number. And I literally tell people to have their client write their cell phone number on their arm, because when the guards call them for, it's your time for your interview, it's going to be on the phone, you can't bring any pieces of paper with you. So you can't have memorized your attorney's number, because maybe your brain's going to be all mushy. And even if your attorney has tried to enter an appearance for you, they will still not get called usually unless that migrant says, here, call so-and-so. So not only do you have to give people your cell phone numbers, you have to theoretically answer between 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. in whatever time zone, 7 days a week. What if you're in court? What if your kid has a performance? What if you're showering? I answered a credible fear interview call once literally in the shower and was like, oh yes, hi officer, here I am for sure. Oh my gosh, right? Luckily it wasn't a video call. And so that's the situation where we're in. And when we're talking about, people need attorneys, there's this myth of oh, well, because attorneys just coach people to lie. But I think some of the good examples is these credible fear interviews are also not recorded. There's just notes on them. So there's no audio recording, there's no transcript. You'll see things that look like transcripts, but they're not, they're just notes. The interpreters they use aren't certified interpreters. They don't even need any degrees whatsoever. And for some of the languages, they don't even need to be literate in that language. They only have to have spoken fluency. So we'll see very consistently incredibly bad interpretation, not certified interpreters doing this. There's no recording, there's no transcript. So when there's problems, so if you don't have an attorney on it, all of these issues. And one of the biggest questions I see, for example, is cultural differences of interpreting the word, do you know why blah, blah, blah happened? And how you interpret that word know. Because especially for people, because sometimes especially for people coming from like a Christian background, only God knows, right? I don't know why this horrible thing happened to me. And so when you're asked directly, do you know why you were shot? Do you know why your house was burned down? The response is like, no, I mean, only God knows. I don't know. But yes, you have speculation. You have reasons why you think it is. And that's kind of what the officer is asking for. They're not asking you, do you know? Does anybody know definitively? They're asking you, why do you think this happened? Well, this happened because blah, 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 blah. But when the questions are all phrased in this one way, that's like one of the biggest things we do when it comes to working with our clients about preparing them for credible fear interviews, is asking, this is what the officer is looking for. These are the elements of asylum. These are the types of things to talk about. Because if you think that, you know, like I'm a person of color or I'm very dark skinned, and yes, there's always racism against me, but you're going to maybe think that that's obvious, right? You're coming from a country where, like, of course, you know, I'm an Afro-Brazilian. Of course, everybody treats me horrifically because that's just how it is. And you're maybe not going to affirmatively bring that up unless you have an attorney working with you to tell you those types of things. And so when we see these low passage rates, it's because of how the process has changed and become so much more difficult. It's not just because people are lying. And I've seen, you know, gay married Russians who recently lost, a Vietnamese Catholic woman who had been arrested by the police multiple times, subjected to electroshock torture, who lost because she could allegedly relocate elsewhere in Vietnam, even though our own State Department just declared religious freedom in Vietnam to be the highest level of like red alert. This Afro-Brazilian, same thing. The interpreter and the actual transcript, which is in a transcript, it's just notes, didn't interpret the word macumbero, and macumbero is roughly similar to the N-word in Brazil, with a specific religious bent of like making, you know, antagonism. They didn't even translate the word. So how could the officer possibly know that it was just a misspelling of macumbero? Like, not even know what that means if it's not interpretive, if it's not proper. And so that's why we see these low passage rates. So sorry, that was just like a side note about when you think of common sense reforms, oh, people aren't passing their credible fear interviews. It must be because they're liars, so we're deporting them quickly. We have these really quick deportations right now. It's because of all these other factors. And also we changed the policy in June 5th to say that you have to affirmatively say, I'm afraid, I'm afraid, I'm afraid, I want an interview, as opposed to asking. We used to have to ask. So it's called the shout test. And we are consistently hearing from people who have been deported without their credible fear interview, even though they're like, I cried, I said I was afraid, I did all of these things to manifest fear, and they ignored me and ignored me and ignored me, and they put me on that plane anyway. I have countless examples of attorneys who put in writing, in emails to the administration, or, you know, to ICE, et cetera, to Border Patrol, my client has fear, they want their credible fear interview, deported anyway. The human rights organizations have so many of these examples. And I know of many, many of these cases personally. So just all of that background. And then about the CLP real quick, I'll say it's really complicated, the answer to that question of how to try and get an exception or rebut the presumption for the CLP for people who are now coming up for their final asylum hearings, because they're finally to this point where they're going to be seeing judges. I'd say I did 2 different trainings. If you're an AILA member, those 2 trainings are available for the recordings for free to anyone who's an AILA member. And I also do private consulting with people. If attorneys want, you can email me, but CGRS has a really, really good guide on it. The Center for Gender and Refugee Services, anyway, I forgot CGRS. They have a really great guide, but the biggest things to focus on is you really want to paint a picture of exceptionally compelling circumstances for your client. That list is not exhaustive. It says exceptionally compelling circumstances such as imminent threat to life or safety, et cetera, et cetera. So you just make a big spaghetti wall approach of the totality of the circumstances. Why is your respondent, your client, exceptional? What was special about their case, and why they couldn't sit around Mexico and wait for this stupid app that isn't even in their language or whatever it is. So, and don't sleep on the family unity provision. That one's people forget about too. That's a really good one. So we're over time, sorry.
No, that's okay. Thank you, Taylor, for providing that answer. I actually just want to take a step back because I know Stephanie alluded to it and throughout the conversation. there were mentions of fear. Can you please define asylum or the legal test for asylum for immigration law practitioners? And then I'll hop into the next question.
Sorry, yeah, I can jump in and do that. So asylum is when someone needs to show that they have a well-founded fear of persecution based on a protected ground, which would be political opinion, nationality, race, religion, or particular social group. And so it's connecting the fear of past persecution or well-founded fear of future persecution with one of those protected grounds for the reason why they are fearing that persecution.
Thank you, Stephanie. That kind of helps to center the conversation for those who are not familiar with this area. And I'll throw this question out to the entire panel. I know it's already been answered, but if anyone wants to add, do any of the panelists have experience involving the United States/Canada border? And are the problems at the northern border similar, worse, or different than what occurs at the southern border?
I know Denise answered it a little bit, and I can comment a bit on it too, in that we definitely do see a different outlook on the Canada-US side. And certainly I think it's telling because Canada has an entirely different asylum system too than that of Mexico. So I think many applicants end up applying for asylum in Canada before they decide to cross over from the United States. And I'm not sure if the question is referring to asylum only, but otherwise the ports of entry do operate quite differently.
Thank you, Michelle. And I think that also highlights what Professor Gilman was discussing earlier, the human rights element and kind of the xenophobia and the racism that's at play concerning the policies. I'm going to transition to another question, which I think, again, Stephanie touched upon in her portion of today's webinar. But what should a new attorney do if they are interested in starting to practice in the area of immigration law?
Yeah, I saw someone wrote the response of, finding a mentor is really important, and a couple different ways to do that. Joining AILA and your local AILA chapter would be really important. There's listservs and people who are asking questions and connecting, and there's monthly meetings and mixers, and so that's a really good way to connect with people. I've practiced a few different areas of law in my career, and I found that with immigration, the bar is so friendly. People really want to help. Everyone is rowing the boat in the same direction on, the immigration practitioner side. And so people really are welcoming new people to the practice and very willing to provide mentorship and assistance. And then the other piece of that, of course, is pro bono. Pro bono, pro bono, pro bono. It's such a great way to get involved, to get mentorship. You don't have to be embarrassed about any questions because the nonprofits are there to guide you, to help you. And it's a really wonderful way to get some hands-on experience so that you can learn more and up your skills and then use that in your own practice.
Thank you, Stephanie. And we do know some of the questions have been answered in the chat, but there may be other individuals who are maybe more seasoned attorneys looking to transition and may have that same question, maybe weren't comfortable to ask it, so we want to throw it out there. And I do believe as well, Stephanie, that many organizations where you can do the clinics or direct representation, they also cover you as concerns malpractice insurance if you do engage in the pro bono work.
That's correct. With the Commission on Immigration, yes, we would provide malpractice protection across all of our pro bono projects. So we do, but it's always a great question to ask if you're working with a different organization, just to make sure before you jump in. But it's pretty common for that to be provided.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We are getting nearing the end, but I just wanted to just make a quick comment about, we did have someone who was actually 3L at Cleveland State University. I just appreciate the message that was written that she is a law student and involved in a lot of in the community advocacy clinic and is working on pro bono immigration asylum clinics and activities, and that she's helping fill out asylum applications. They don't represent them, but they help people with this, and so she finds it, or this, the 3L finds it very rewarding. And so I just thought that was great to see, and that, you can get involved in law school and can continue that and continue the pro bono work. So thank you for that. I'll have Kerline just close it out for us.
Thank you, Valencia. Thank you for chairing the subcommittee that actually put together today's webinar. Thank you for your leadership. And thank you again for organizing such a great discussion for immigration practitioners and non-immigration practitioners. And thank you to, Valencia is going to thank yous at the end, but thank you again to our esteemed panelists. It was definitely a wonderful discussion. As I mentioned in the beginning, as was highlighted through the discussion, I have so many notes that I took while everyone was speaking. I encourage everyone to think about ways of that they could lead and activate diversity in their practice and or local communities. So again, if you have kind of considered that as you've listened to the different speakers, we encourage you to share ways that you are doing that in the chat. And Gabby, Victoria already shared that. And others can mention ways that they are leading and activating diversity in their local community. As I considered this prompt, I will lead and activate diversity by, I was reminded by that quote that says, they came for the Jews and I was not one, so I did not speak up. They came for the communists and I was not one, so I did not speak up. And so thinking about that, I will lead and activate diversity by making it my business to stay informed. Even though this is not my practice area, I will make it my business to be informed because as was highlighted through all the speakers, this is a human rights issue. And you may not be an immigration attorney, but you are definitely a human being. And putting in the context of this country, making the decision to have policies to allow individuals who have credible fear of persecution, past, present, or future in their countries to come here and receive help. If we make the decisions to open arms to individuals, I want to be part of that movement that ensures that these individuals' human rights are not violated. So I'll make a decision. I will make it my intention and my business to stay informed, and that is getting involved, as Stephanie said, with the American Immigration Lawyers Association in my local area, also known as AILA, to make sure that I know the resources that are available, so that even if I myself cannot help an individual with a case, I can point them to the right direction and to the resources that they need to be supported. So that's how I will lead and activate diversity. Thank you. And Valencia, how will you lead and activate diversity?
Kerline, I will lead and activate diversity by coming from a place of compassion and just striving to be a zealous advocate for my immigration clients and continue to present them with updated information in order for them to make the best decisions for their families.
Thank you, Valencia. And do any of the panelists want to share how they will lead and activate diversity? I feel like this whole webinar was about the ways in which you do so, but if you want to speak on that specifically, we'll open the floor for you as well.
Yeah, I can sum up and say, I will activate diversity by inserting more policy and advocacy measures that insert humanity in immigration. And I think that's a very important topic to close out.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
And, a huge thank you to our panelists for participating in this webinar and the ABA support staff, Steve and Molly, for helping to make this happen. We hope you gain valuable insight and knowledge. And just as a reminder that the PDF document shared to you in the beginning of the webinar has all the speaker panelist bios, and feel free to reach out to them if you want to follow up on any questions you may have or anything that they mentioned, and also with the ABA pro bono opportunities. And also has some great resources and materials. So please don't forget to download that and check that out. And thank you so much for joining us today.